he came around this building and, there was something there in the shadows. It was something that wasn't human. It was 6.5 feet tall, and apparently, it frightened him quite a bit. And he, ran off. He told some other guys that were there, and they just laughed at him. They didn't believe what he was talking about. And then when it showed up the next night, I guess they knew for a fact that he wasn't, lying, that this thing was real, and that whatever it wasn't normal. It was September 23rd, 1978, Carpathia, Romania. Two mechanics, Martin Rott and Victor Chita, noticed a mysterious light near Lake Balea. The light seemed to pulsate and hover above the ground. The two men were somewhat astonished given that the object made absolutely no sound. After several minutes, the strange light disappeared. According to Rott and Chita, it didn't fly away, it simply vanished. One moment it was there, and the second it was gone. Around the time the mechanics Martin Rott and Victor Chita were watching the strange light, Johann Jur, a private, was walking by some nearby barracks where the soldiers of his unit were located. Jur's unit had been busy constructing a youth hostel. As he walked around some buildings, Jur was suddenly confronted by a 6.5-foot tall, all-black, human-like figure. He ran into the barracks in order to find some more people to come out and look at the creature, but he couldn't find anybody. He then saw the being standing against the window. I saw a black creature standing 6 to 8 meters from me. It was about 2 meters tall, he recalled. He immediately turned and ran off to find a weapon. Upon running into some men, he told them what happened and was met with only laughter. When Jur returned to the spot, this time with an axe in his hand, the entity was gone. The next night, September 24th, Johann Jur and one of his friends, a man named Volpe, were in the process of leaving the barracks when they ran into Sergeant Radu Ion at the door. He insisted that the tall dark figure was back. "Look, there, on the hill," Ion shouted. Jur looked, and sure enough, a black creature, roughly the same size as the one he'd observed the previous night, was standing by the fuel tank. Frightened, the soldiers rushed inside the barracks and slammed the door. After collecting themselves, Ion went outside and ordered Jur and Volpe to follow him. The creature was still there, seemingly oblivious to what had just happened. The sergeant, armed with a baton, slowly crept towards it, while Jur and Volpe followed. They then watched in disbelief as Ion approached and swung at the creature. None of the blows seemed to connect. For some reason, Ion simply could not hit it. Suddenly, Jur and Volpe watched as Ion fell backwards. The creature then leaned over him, and for several minutes, he seemed to be examining the sergeant. Jur and Volpe then heard a strange sound coming from the humanoid and saw something flashing in its hand. They wanted to help Ione, but found that they could not move. Both acknowledged feeling paralyzed, bound by an unknown force. When the creature finally turned and walked off into the night, the men regained their ability to move. The soldiers carried Ion, who was laying on the ground, back to the barracks. From head to waist, Ion's body was soft or loose, and from the waist down, it was very stiff. Once inside the barracks, the men observed that his face, hands, and feet were much redder than the rest of his body. He continued to hold the baton in his hand in a vice grip. Jur and Volpe felt helpless on what to do. After a long 10 minutes, Ione seemed to come to his senses. One of the soldiers in the barracks, while the others were assisting the sergeant, decided to look outside to find out what was going on. He was surprised to see that the entire top of the hill was illuminated by a kind of spherical glow. 4 egg-shaped lights appeared to be dancing atop the hill. He immediately went back inside. None of the others dared step outside to investigate. Instead, they merely barricaded themselves, remaining awake until the first light of dawn, whereupon they collectively went to sleep. When they eventually awoke, they checked around the barracks for any sign of the creature. They soon discovered strange marks on the window frames. It seems sometime in the night something had approached the barracks, and maybe even looked in the window. Investigator Bhaskar Iosif wrote of this case in the September 1994 issue of Fate magazine. Mikhail Gershtein, chairman of the Ufological Commission of the Russian Geographical Society, also wrote of the case in his book, What Ufologists Hide. He updated the case, providing names and a few more details, including the fact that strange men in black suits were observed on the hillside, seemingly examining the spot where the soldier had observed the dancing lights. It would seem, just going by the timing, that these two events were somehow connected. That this object that was observed by these two mechanics, I've also heard them described as locksmiths. This object was sighted not far away. At the same time, this this soldier ran into this creature, hanging around the barracks, this non-human entity. And it reappeared the next night. What it was doing there, I have no idea. It just seemed to be hanging out, and it didn't really do anything. Even when the sergeant tried to attack it, it didn't really fight back. The sergeant wasn't able to hit it. And then at that point, even when the sergeant went down, the creature didn't do anything then, other than it seemed like it just examined him, and then that was it. But it was early April 1968, Burnaby, British Columbia, Canada. Mrs. Eileen McPherson was out walking her dog. It was fairly late, about 11:30 p.m. She suddenly noticed something odd in the night sky. A, quote, bright pink light seemed to be hovering over some nearby houses at a very low altitude. I noticed that the light appeared to be pulsating. As I watched, the UFO started to get larger, still pulsating, as though it was coming towards me. I went towards the house, calling for my daughter to come out and look. As I did so, the object stopped, hovered, and finally vanished behind some trees. The strangeness continued. Eileen claims that when her daughter appeared in the doorway, the object suddenly returned, hovering nearby. It was still pulsating, and it began to climb swiftly on an erratic course before coming back down and moving behind some trees, though it was still visible. Spooked, the two women decided to go back inside and call the Burnaby RCMP. They were hoping that an officer could come out and see what they were seeing. The officer who took the call informed them that they would contact them later. This indicated to the two women that they would probably not be sending a car out to come and have a look. Not wanting to go back outside, the mother and daughter opted to simply lock up and go to bed. Curiously, their evening would only get stranger. At around 3 a.m., Eileen's phone rang. She was surprised given how late it was. The person on the other end told Eileen that they were with the RCMP, and that they would be sending some officers over to take a statement. Eileen couldn't believe it. Sure enough, two men, identifying themselves as constables, arrived and interviewed Eileen and her daughter about their sighting. At some point in the conversation, Eileen made it clear that she wasn't happy about being roused at such early morning hours. One of the officers informed her that they were, quote, just following orders from Ottawa. Given the strangeness of the event, Eileen decided to reach out to the Columbian a newspaper based out of New Westminster, British Columbia. A reporter, Jay Allen, spoke to Eileen as well as her daughter, and a young man named Dan Godbout, who was staying with the two women. These two men also apparently took a statement from Godbout, even though Dan admittedly never saw the object and had nothing to do with it beyond the fact that he was living under the same roof. The reporter agreed that it was quite odd that the two officers would come calling at such late hours. He reached out to the RCMP looking for some answers. A spokesman for the Burnaby RCMP seemed equally puzzled. He admitted to Allen that they had no explanation for the, quote, unusual procedure, unless the matter was of extreme urgency. But there was no urgency in this case, and I cannot offer an explanation, he said. Jay Allen also reached out to the Radar Control Center at Vancouver Airport. They reported, quote, nothing unusual on the evening in question. What interested the Canadian government so much that they wanted to send two RCMP officers over to this woman's house at, that time of night? I mean, it doesn't sound like it's normal. Going by what the RCMP, the spokesman said, they were kind of puzzled by it as well. There was no, there was no, urgency here. There was no, absolute need for them to be there at that time. So it definitely sounds kind of strange.